Skylark, have you anything to say to me? Won't you tell me where my love can be? Is there a meadow in the mist where someone's waiting to be kissed? Skylark, have you seen a valley green with spring, where my heart can go a journeying over the shadows and the rain to a blossom covered lane? And in your lonely flight, haven't you heard the music of the night? Wonderful music, faint as a will of the wisp, crazy as a loon, sad as a gypsy serenading the moon. Skylark, I don't know if you can find these things, but my heart is riding on your wings. So if you see them anywhere, won't you take me there? Skylark, 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 skylark.
Check, check, check. Hey everyone, how's it going? Nice to see all of you. It is Dolltr or Claire. We're back here with 343 Labs on their YouTube channel. Thank you so much everyone for tuning in. I see a couple of folks already hanging out. Greetings to Scott. But yeah, I'm an electronic musician and a producer and a performer and also a very proud and happy instructor of the 343 Labs community. So I teach with 343 Labs. We are a school that's based in Manhattan in New York in the United States. But now though, we have a Berlin section that's kind of coming up and our co-founder Max is over there holding things down, holding the fort down while the rest of us are over here in New York in quarantine. But regardless, thank you so much for spending time with us. So in the light of a lot of the things that have been going on with COVID in the city, we don't have any in-person lessons now, although we might have some in returning in the future. But we've been doing a lot of things online with programming like 343 TV, which is where we broadcast every day. And I do the Monday show with more or less a bunch of Ableton Live things. And most of these things are tips and tricks that I've learned. So it's kind of appropriate that the title of my show is Tips and Tricks with the exclamation points. That's always super important. So thanks everyone for tuning in as usual. I wanted to kind of walk through one tip/trick thing in live that I've done a lot of that people always ask me about a lot of too. And that is looping and what it means to actually loop. And if you've seen a bunch of my performance videos, you'll know that I am a live electronic music performer, and I do a lot of different kinds of skills and not skills, but I use lots of different skills in my live performances, and I have lots of different kinds of setups. That's probably the right word for it. That helps me control different kinds of things. And again, not being afraid to call out the person who disliked this video even before it started. Man, you hurt us so much. Well, no, not really. You don't. You can do whatever you want. But I feel like at this point, and maybe this is a side note, but it's for myself. I was thinking about how when I used to have my old YouTube channel, I used to be really active on YouTube a bunch of years ago. I would get so upset by people who dislike things, and now I'm just kind of like, that's it. You like what you like and you like what you don't like. And sometimes you'll have the more things you do, the more you'll have people just hate you for no reason at all. So I'm great. I'm so like happy that we're making things happen. Yay, we're becoming better. But in the meantime, wanted to head back over to looping. So being a bit more serious about this now, because I feel like people often think of it as this not unachievable, but this kind of like separate hurdle in a lot of live performances, and maybe it gets a lot of folks a little bit confused also because it seems a bit arbitrary at first. Like people will just say like, looping and stuff, and we don't really know what's going on behind that. So this is kind of the insight behind it, and yeah, totally. Yeah, Live Society, you're totally right. There's always got to be that one person who's like doing some strange things, or sometimes not even one. Like, for example, I recently put out a premiere video for a track that I haven't even released yet for my EP on my own YouTube channel. That's dolltr. So I put out the premiere video, and it's good. I have a new single dropping this Friday, everyone, so it's going to be out on Friday. But again, the video hasn't even appeared. The song hasn't even been released or heard yet by the public, but I've already had multiple dislikes on that video. So I was like, oh yay, good. It means we're kind of getting somewhere, I guess, with all of this. One of my mentors once told me that too, and I completely agree. And it's interesting that they told me that even outside of the context of electronic music, it was just like more performance in general, because it was one of my other mentors from my other parts of life. But yeah, yay, we're making moves. So back to looping. We've been doing a lot of just playing loops in general, but I wanted to walk you through a bit of my process for, first of all, how to set looping up, and maybe also diving into what exactly it constitutes, what you consider live looping and what maybe people don't consider live looping as much. And then show you a couple of the neat doll tricks that I use for it. So let's get started. If I recall my session from last week, goodness, words today, you'll remember that I did a lot of things involving vocoder and different parts of vocoder, using it to harness the power of the vocoder device in live in many different ways. So let's take a bit of a recap and take a moment to recap what I did last week. I'm going to launch this scene in live over here, and it's going to play this series of clips in this entire row together. So if you remember what we did at the end of last week, we used vocoder, the device, to not just vocode vocals, but we used it on some drums also. But originally we had some vocals going. So we had this.
Okay, don't stop what you're doing. Just keep it moving, yeah. Okay, don't stop what you're doing. Just keep it moving, yeah.
Let's also slow that down a little bit. So I brought that down to about 120 beats per minute. And that's essentially looping, right? And if you think about it, we're playing different loops. They're repeating themselves. They're going on and on and on until we tell them to stop looping. So for example,
okay, don't stop what you're doing. Just keep it moving, yeah.
By launching an empty scene in live, you'll be able to stop a series of clips that have been looping. And that means playing without you having to, keep re-triggering them, keep pressing them. But what if we want to do some live looping? Usually I think of live looping as being the act of doing it in real time. So for example, I could have these other clips playing. Maybe I'm having them a little softer so that you can hear me speak over them. It's me having other music playing and playing things on the fly, but being able to add things on top without having to stop anything at all. So I'm going to walk you through a bit of that process. You might also see that next to me on my right, I have a MIDI controller here. It's not Push, even though you might affectionately know me as Push Lady. It's not Push this time, but it is some kind of controller. So maybe that lives to my other name, which is Controller Lady. And it is an MPK Mini. It's one of my favorite controllers, and I think it's one of the controllers that I find gives you the best bang for your buck. It's about, I think, $100 or so US dollars if you're in the United States. And it has lots of different features. You've got some keys, you've got some pads, which we'll be using today. You've got some knobs also, which we may or may not use depending on how fast things go. And you've also got a joystick on the top left. So that's a cool feature that you can use for some more effects manipulation too. Ooh, also wanted to say hi to Bug Tank and Oliver Scott. Welcome back. Good morning or afternoon. Yes, to you, regardless of wherever you are. And maybe before I even go on, I'll start talking a little bit more about setup. But if I could get a number from the folks in the chat, any number between 20 and 999, that would be great. If I could get a number from 20 to 999. Ooh, Oliver had a question. How do I automate pitch bending if my MIDI controller doesn't have a pitch wheel? Well, that's not really related to what we're doing in today's stream, but I'll see if I can incorporate that. Thank you for that question. There's a really great way to check that out, actually, and it's from the Ableton Reference Manual. So if you search Ableton Reference Manual, you can look up automation, and you'll be able to see doing that. Ooh, Paul, thank you. 21, we had 855 also. Let's run with Paul's idea. Hi, Paul. Let's run with your idea. Let's do a multiple of 21. So maybe let's do 84, which is 4 times of 21. So let's use 84 as our tempo for today. And we'll try to incorporate a couple of the other things that we get from everyone. But oh, cool, I see a couple of other names pop up. Hi, Kendall. How's it going? I hope everyone else is doing well too. See hi from Lewis also. Welcome back too. But yeah, let's get back to this. So what I'm going to do now is stop all clips in live. I can do that by heading over to my master track and clicking on this square. Usually anytime you see a square in live or any other kind of music software that you're using, that's going to be a stop button. So that's really useful to be able to remember. I'm also going to increase my mic volume a bit so that I can speak without straining my voice too much. But great, we've stopped all the clips now by clicking on that stop button. I'm also going to head back to the beginning of transport over here. What I'm going to do for now is close up my vocoder rack. We'll bring that up later, my vocoder group, I mean. And I'm going to start off by doing a little bit of looping in the instance of playing, say, some kinds of drums, maybe with my computer keyboard. I'm going to start off by creating a new MIDI track that's going to be Control-Shift-T or Command-Shift-T on a PC or a Mac, depending on which one you're on. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and just rename this MIDI clip drums, because I know I'm going to MIDI track drums, because I know I'm going to put my drums on this track. And I'm also going to recolor it. So I just right-clicked on that, and yeah, let's not color it red. Let's do like a brownie orange color. Usually that's my go-to drums sort of color. And I'm going to also head over to my browser. That's going to help me search for a couple of sounds, and in this case, I want to look for some drums. So let's look for a drum rack. Maybe I'll look in packs, I think. Packs are a really great way to look for certain sounds in live if you want them organized according to maybe characteristic. So in this case, there's a pack that I love that's, I believe it's native to Live's core library as well, but it's called Build and Drop, and it has some really great drum collections in it. So for example, ooh, cool. That one seems pretty neat. It's called the This Night Kit. So I'm going to drag the This Night Kit onto my drums MIDI track, and we will populate it. So let's drag that on. Cool. So now, depending on what, how your settings are in Live, you may or may not have a track automatically arm when you bring up a device. Sometimes if you drag a kit or any kind of instrument into the drop files and devices section here, it'll automatically arm. But if you ever want to use a MIDI controller to be able to play sounds on your device or on your Mac, or whether you're using a Windows PC as well, you need to first arm that track. And to arm a track, that's going to be that button over here. That is the record arm button on a track. And now if you have a MIDI controller connected and set up correctly, you should be able to play certain notes using your MIDI controller. I'm also just going to check because I'm not sure if I have it connected properly, and maybe that'll be a good chance for us to kind of walk through exactly how to connect your MIDI controller. The very first thing you want to do is, of course, make sure that its USB cable is in. So I just unplugged mine to restart all of this because I have had it plugged in for a while, so maybe you need a second to register. But the second thing you want to do is head over to Preferences in Live, and that's going to be Control, on a PC or Command, on a Mac. So I'm going to head over there, and now I'm in my Preferences in Live. You'll see a lot of tabs on the left-hand side over here. So I'm going to head over to my MIDI Preferences, and okay, I'm going to make sure that I have track on for my MPK Mini, and I also want to turn remote on for what I'm going to do today, because what I'm going to show you is looping by way of doing a bit of MIDI mapping, so that's going to help us a little bit. So I have both of these on. I have track on, and I also have remote on for my MPK Mini, which is the name of this controller. Once that's done, I can exit out of Live, and now I should be able to play some notes with my MIDI controller. So I'm able to do that now. You can hear all of these sounds coming in. If I wanted to, I could also use my pads for that. Like if I set things up correctly, I could potentially use my pads to play different kinds of sounds as well. But what I'm going to do for today is maybe a little bit of an alternative way of doing this. I'm going to use my keys to play the sounds, to play all the sounds that I'm using. And I'm going to use my pads to set up some looping points for my drums. What this means is that I'm going to map one of these to my drums over here. So I'm going to map one of my pads to my clip slot so that whenever I press a certain pad on my controller, it's going to trigger that clip slot and say, okay, Claire is about to play something in. Be ready to record that when she plays something in. What I'm also going to do is turn on my metronome or my click in Live. That's going to be on the top left-hand side of Live. It's this little grayed out circle and a black circle next to it. This means that whenever I press play by hitting the space bar, I'm going to hear a reference for the time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's going to be my timing. I'm also going to make it a little bit softer for now. And I can do that by heading over to the bottom right of Live, and there's a little headphone icon with a blue knob. That's going to be your Q level. So how loud your metronome is in your head. Or in your ears, depending on whether, not in your head, yeah. I was going to say in your headphones, but then I think I said in your head. But it's in your ears or inside your headphones if you have a pair of headphones. Or from your speakers, depending on how exactly you're using this. So, now that we have this all set up, we need to map this clip slot to start looping stuff. So, let's head over to the top right-hand side of Live, and you'll see a button, a little kind of radio-ish button that says MIDI. If you click on that, it's going to put you into MIDI mapping mode. And anything that appears this shade of blue over here, it's a little bit like an overlay that maybe you might see a lot of in like Photoshop overlays, color overlays, if anyone here else uses Photoshop. But when I first saw it, it kind of reminded me a little bit of that, like color overlays. Any of these things that you see in this blue hue or this purplish sort of hue can be mapped. So if I click on my clip slot, I need to make sure that it's selected. If I click on that, and if I hit a pad now on my MIDI keyboard, I can map it to that particular slot. Now, anytime that I subsequently press this pad on my MIDI keyboard, it's going to trigger that particular slot once I exit MIDI mapping mode. So just as a quick demo, this is exactly how it works. First of all, again, mapped my pad that I wanted to use, and then I can head out of MIDI mapping mode, and now everything looks as if it's back to normal, but we know that there is something going on under the hood. So because of that, we're able to kind of do a little bit of secret things with Live. So I'm going to play Live first. I'm going to activate transport, and you can hear that click in your head, and maybe I'll practice something a little bit first. So I'll do maybe something like that. And when I'm ready to record into this loop, I can press that pad. So again, keeping in mind the metronome, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to press this pad at the end of one of those counts. So I'll press it on 4 and then I'll start playing, or maybe on 2, and we'll see. So 1, 2, 3. Here we go. Cool. And now I'm going to make this a little softer for the cue, or I'll turn off the metronome really. And if I double click on this clip, there is whatever I recorded in. And you might notice that my timing isn't exactly perfect because there was a little bit of latency between me and the keyboard and the computer. And latency is a term that we use to describe the amount of time between the time that you play something on your keyboard, which for me I can kind of feel just a little bit unsettling, and the time that your computer registers it. But basically what I did was I pressed this pad when I wanted to start recording, and I pressed it again when I wanted to stop recording, and I ended up getting a neat loop. So now I can play that. And if I want to stop, I can always press the spacebar and stop transport as a whole. If I wanted to stop this without having to press any button though, it might have been good for me to map this stop button as well. So just as a reminder, if you go into MIDI map mode, any of these blue things that you see is mappable. So let's say I want to map maybe my this pad over here to be the stop button. That way I can kind of start and stop my loop whenever I want to. I can do that, and I can exit MIDI mapping mode. And now I can start that loop. And I can also stop it by pressing a pad. So that's one easy way that you can start recording and playing with loops. I'd also like to speak a little bit about when I was kind of starting these loops. I feel like that's something that people also get a bit confused about. But you'll notice that I started pressing the record button or pressing that clip slot and getting ready to record before the start of the bar. Because if I had pressed it right when the number 1 hit, for example, that would be too late. I need to give Live a little bit of time ahead in order to prep it and say, okay, at the start of the next bar, I'm going to start recording and looping. So it does require quite a strong understanding of bars and beats and also how launch quantization works in Live. So we've got that too. But yeah, that's a great kind of starting point. What I want to maybe also add on to this, now that I've done some live looping drums, and I'll make this a little softer, is maybe some other kind of melodic type of part. So maybe this will be a good thing to also tie into Oliver Scott's question about automating pitch bending, which even though it's available in the manual, I'll show you how to do it right now. I'm going to start off by creating a new empty MIDI track. So again, Command-Shift-T. And let's find a sound that we could use for this. So maybe some kind of, I think pads might actually be pretty nice for this. So let's do some pads, maybe from Operator, which is an FM synthesis instrument in Live. Let's find a pad that we like. Cool, that's pretty neat. Let's click and drag and put that on. And I'm also going to arm this pad track and rename it appropriately. So here we go. Here's pad. And now I can play my pads. Cool. Before I do that, if I could get a letter between A to G from the crowd, I'll go ahead and explain a little bit of what's going on. But in the meantime, a letter from A to G, please, from the audience. I feel sometimes when I say these things, I feel like I'm hosting like Wheel of Fortune or something, but it's kind of fun. So yeah, if I could get a letter between A to G. In the meantime, though, what I'm going to do now is while the drums are playing, so without having to stop them, I'm just going to keep letting them play. I'm going to keep looping for the pads as well. So I'm going to set this up while I'm waiting for the suggestion to come in. Let's go into MIDI mapping mode again, and this time we'll map this second pad that I have over here, the second column of pads, to that first clip slot, and we'll map that stop button over here to, there we go. So I'm going to exit MIDI mapping mode now, and it looks like our first letter came in from Oliver Scott himself, or themself, and it is F. So let's use F. So we're going to be in the key of F minor in this case, so I'll play some kind of F minor sort of chord progression, maybe. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, let's do that. And let's start looping some things. So you'll notice again that when I start doing this, there's a specific timing to when I'm doing something. So I'm gonna now press the pad and start recording it on the second count of the bar. So not necessarily doing it right at the beginning, right before the start of a bar, but even any count within the bar before that, you can also press record. So here we go. Let's do some live looping. Oops. And making sure I'm focused on the right window. Here we go. Cool. Ready? 1, 2. Just press the pad. Here we go. Cool. Metronome off. Hands also off. The loop keeps going. Great. I'm also going to unarm that for now. But yeah, you might have noticed how, like, really, I wasn't stopping the clips technically. I'm only stopping transport to talk to you, but whenever I'm recording, they're just kind of going on and on and on. Now, let's see if we can incorporate Oliver Scott's question in, which is, how do you automate pitch bending if your MIDI controller doesn't have a pitch wheel? There's a couple of ways that you can do this. The easiest way to do it, if you are in session view, is through something called clip envelopes. You can also do this in arrangement view if you're in a linear sort of fashion. For example, in this view, you can absolutely do it here too. But I'm going to show you how to do it in session view. What we want to do is we first want to make sure that we're seeing the clip itself. So right now I'm seeing the instrument. If I want to see the clip and the MIDI notes in that clip, I'm going to have to press Shift Tab. And that's going to let me pull up all of the clips that I see here. And as you can see, my notes are off time, because I didn't really quantize them, but I'm going to leave them as is. I don't think there's too much I need to quantize at the moment, especially since this is a more pad-like stretched out sort of sound, so not super crucial with timing for now. We need to then open up what's called the clip envelopes view, and this is something that's traditionally hidden by default in Live, so it's something you have to go deeper into, but it's on the left-hand side of Live. If you don't have info view open, it's going to be all the way on the bottom left. But if you do have info view open, like me, it's a little bit to the right, and it's called the clip box that you see over here, the clip settings box. On the bottom of the clip settings box, you might see this little tiny icon that looks similar to another icon that we've seen before. So Oliver, if you are watching, let me know what that icon looks like, and then we'll proceed with the automation stuff. Let me know if that icon reminds you of anything. It's this tiny icon that you can see my mouse currently at. And while we're waiting for the answer, I'll speak a little bit more about live looping. So like I said, live looping can be done with both MIDI and also with drums. I think one thing that we always think about a lot is, you see people using these fancy sort of controllers, and for most part, the reason why they use controllers, say like Push or the APC40, is because those tend to have capabilities for being automatically mapped to Live, so you won't have to do any of the manual stuff that I showed you just now. That said, you can loop with basically any sort of controller. So to Oliver said overdub. Ooh, so maybe that's not so much overdub, but see if you can look at the icon itself. You've seen this icon before. If you know automation, you have seen this icon before, and it is the same icon that you have in the automation RM button above, and it's also the same icon that you have in the automation mode button on arrangement view. So take a guess and see what that little button might mean. But heading back to what I was just talking about, I'll finish about this and then I'll go on to the next topic if we get the right answer from Oliver. So we're looking at different kinds of controllers. You can absolutely set it up with a normal controller too. APC40s and certain controllers have what we call Ableton remote control scripts. So that means you won't have to do any manual mapping, but any kind of MIDI controller, you can absolutely do this. So that's why I often tend to use like a variety of different controllers for looping. Sometimes I'll use Push if it's like the one thing that I have. Sometimes I'll use the APC40. But sometimes if I only have a MIDI keyboard with me, I can absolutely program it that way too. I've done full live sets with just an MPK Mini if it's been the only thing that I could ever carry with me. So that's why I love having a small little MIDI controller a lot. And maybe this also goes back to answering a question from previous weeks about recommendations for controllers. I guess if I did have to recommend one, back then I'm not sure what I said. Maybe someone remembers what I said, but I would pretty much go for like a generic controller like the MPK Mini. I think it's a really great selection. Again, we're not sponsored by Akai, but if anyone from Akai is watching, we'd love for you to sponsor 343 TV. We're always looking for sponsors. So please reach out to us, or we can also chat if anyone else is watching this. But yay, Oliver, automation. So yes, a great thing about, not necessarily ARM, but a great part about Live is that if you open your eyes and if you look at a lot of the things in Live, it's very, very intuitive. So this icon, we've seen tons of times before. It's that automation icon. It's so familiar to us that maybe we can guess that any other time that we see this icon, it's going to mean something to do with automation. It's the same way that anytime we see a square, we know that it's going to have to do with stopping something. Anytime we see a sideways triangle, it's going to be play something. Anytime you see a circle, it's going to mean record something. So in this case, it's not record session automation, because that would be a circle if you're thinking about it, but it's clip automation, clip envelopes. So if you click on this box, it's going to show you automation individually within a clip. So that's kind of answering the question more at large. So if I wanted to automate things in a clip, and if I don't have a MIDI controller handy, I would have to go into the automation envelopes for each of these individual clips. And from there, I can select a MIDI control, for example, like pitch bend. That's the first option that comes up. And now I have the option of bending pitch up and down. So maybe let's do a little bit of fancy work over here. I'm going to just put in some slots arbitrarily. Yeah, no problem. You're welcome. I feel like oftentimes, interestingly enough, and this is not aimed directly at anyone in the chat, but I think as an educator overall in general, I've noticed that sometimes we ask questions without thinking how we could even solve those problems first. But oftentimes as an educator, I don't strive to just teach you. I strive to teach you how to teach yourself. So if you can walk away from, at least my show, if you can walk away from tips and tricks, knowing how to find out more information for yourself, then I've done my job. And maybe Paul can speak to this. Paul is one of my other students also. Like, I love sharing resources, and I love, re-emphasizing that the Ableton reference manual is so important, because reading it, just even when I started reading it on my own, I learned so much without even having to go to class. But I ended up going to class with more questions about things that weren't in the manual. So I feel like any good question about Live is something that you don't have to look for the manual, and that's when we're having a good question. But in the meantime, we've got some points over here. There's a great chapter on clip envelopes in the reference manual as well. So if you head over to Ableton's website, or if you just Google Ableton reference manual, and it's called the Ableton reference manual because there's info there both for Live and Push. So again, Ableton is the company, Live is the software. Again, all of my usual teacher kinds of speaking. But anyway, we can start doing some automation for clip envelopes and pitch bend by just drawing it in. So check this out. And let's stop these clips with our pads. Boom. Kind of get that filtered sound out of the way. Thank you so much, Scott. Really appreciate it. I'm glad that some people enjoy my teaching style. Some of my students, I joke with a lot of my students, but some of them find that I ask them too many questions when they ask me questions. But that's how I did a lot of my learning too. I think one of my teachers, who's also one of my best mentors that I've had in my life, he used to always make me ask a lot of questions too. So I get that from him. In the meantime, though, we've kind of established how to do live looping of instruments. What now if we want to do live looping of vocals? Maybe some kind of audio. So let's see if we can do that instead. I'm going to pull up some new tracks. This time they're going to be audio tracks, though. So instead of pressing Command-Shift-T or Control-Shift-T, which is how you pull up a new MIDI track, we're going to press Command-T or Control-T. And that's going to pull up audio tracks for us. So now I've got one audio track over here. And I'm going to call this vocals. Now, if I'd like to record some vocals, again, I need to arm the track. And you might see also here that I've got my mic kind of set up already. And this is something that you can check in your preferences as well to check if you've got the right audio interface. But if you do, you should be able to see some kind of external input come in. So maybe let's just walk through this all together as well. Let's go into our preferences in Live. That's going to be Control comma or Command comma, depending on whether you're on a PC or a Mac. And now instead of being in the MIDI tab, which we are done with since we've already set up our MIDI controllers, let's head over to the Audio tab. That's going to be over here, and we can see Input and Output Device. Now, if we are putting audio into Live, we are concerned with an input device. So we've got to make sure that the input device is correct. If I click over here in this drop-down menu, I get a couple of options. I get my MacBook Pro microphone, for example. I also got my Duet, which is my audio interface that I'm currently using for this. And that's why I have it selected. That's because my mic is going into my Duet, and I'm using that to communicate with all of you, as well as to do some looping shortly. So great. My audio interface is set up right how I want it. And as you can see, my buffer size is kind of big because I need to manage all of these things at once. So it's giving me a little bit more latency than I would like. But that's it. I'm here for my vocals. I want to arm the track so I'm ready to record. And boom. So a couple of things. The setup that I'm using for this particular instance of vocal looping is going to be a little bit different from my usual setup. And that's because usually when I'm looping and when I'm performing, I don't necessarily have a monitoring thing for me to speak to people for. So oftentimes I'll have this set to monitoring as auto. So if I do this now, you might hear it maybe a little bit louder. And that's because I'm going to mute my original monitoring mic. That's because now you're hearing me through here instead. So you're hearing me through this vocal track and you're not hearing me through my original track that I had over here. But because of this, there are also a couple of things that I want to do to maybe enhance this a little bit, especially if this is a singing kind of vocal. I want to do a couple of things. I want to maybe EQ it a little bit. So let's grab an audio effect. And this is something that you might recall from my previous streams that I did with regards to vocal processing. But I want to put an EQ on it. And an EQ is a device that's going to cut off some of those lower frequencies that I don't need. For example, most of my voice is really coming in around this area that I'm circling around. So these lower frequencies, we can cut them out. So let's put on a high pass filter and cut those out a little bit. Great, so that's a little bit of a cleaner sort of sound. Now let's also compress this a bit. And that's just going to make my voice a little bit tighter because I do have a very dynamic voice. Sometimes you might hear that my voice gets like really low and kind of subdued, and other times it's really loud. So for all the times that it's really loud, I want to make sure I'm not harming anybody's ears. And now I can reset that volume to 0. I might also put on maybe a bit of reverb in this case. So I'm going to just directly drag on a reverb device. And we'll hear some reverb on my voice. But I want to do a little bit of shaping. First of all, I want there to be less reverb in general. So moving down the dry wet knob. And also, I want the reverb to be a little longer. Maybe like that. But with a little bit of less of that low end. So let's turn on this low diffusion network activator button and let's bring that down. So now, a little bit of something brighter, perhaps. And I also want to add in a little bit of a input filter. So cutting out the low end when my voice comes in. So now we get a little bit of a brighter sort of reverb sound. I also want to add in some pre-delay. That means that there's going to be a slight amount of time between the instance of my voice and the instance of the reverberation itself. And this is something I usually do in the case of vocals because it cleans up a little bit of that reverb a bit more. So again, I'm going to bring this a little more down, maybe make things a little less dense. Cool, so we now have this vocal sort of thing going on. Let's see what happens if I play my loops back. Maybe I'll think of some kind of vocal part. I'm also going to turn on the metronome for this so that you can hear more of the counts as well. And generally, whenever I'm looping, I do like to just turn down the reverb for a moment. Generally, when I'm having the what was I going to say? Generally, when I'm having the metronome playing, it's usually always in my ears. So this is something that if you've ever seen me perform live, that's always in my ears. Even though the audience doesn't hear it, I'm usually hearing that as a reference. So now let's bring back the wet knob. Ooh, MK Got Beats, welcome. I'm not sure if you've tuned into our streams before, but absolutely, we do this once every week on the 343 Labs YouTube channel. MK Got Beats, sorry, mispronounced it. MK Got Beats mentioned that we should do this more often. Yes, we have daily programming on 343 Labs. 343 TV is the name of our programming that we do every day at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, so you can tune in and subscribe if you like more. You can also follow me on my own YouTube channel. I do lots of tutorials there, and I do occasional live streams there as well. You can also follow me on Instagram. I do Instagram lives there sometimes too, and that's where a bunch of people are actually also watching. And you can follow me on all platforms as dolltr. That's lowercase DOLLTR exclamation point CK. So yes, I absolutely do these more often, and I would almost say that if you think I should do these more often, then maybe you should subscribe to us so that you can be updated more often. So please subscribe to 343 Labs, and you can also subscribe to me on my YouTube channel. Again, that's DOLLTR exclamation point CK. But back to this over here right now. Let's bring back the reverb. Whoop, there we go. And let's do our MIDI mapping. So let's do clicking on this column over here, pressing on this pad, and I'll also press on this one over here. And now let's exit MIDI mode. Cool. So let's see if we can think of something to add on and layer onto this. Cool. So I thought of something. Let's see if this goes okay. Whoops. Cool. So here's something interesting that you may or may not have noticed. I'm going to temporarily turn off the reverb, but check this out. So I accidentally pressed the stop button too late. So take a listen to this. This is fun. Ooh, whoops. Cool. So now we have an extra clip over here. Maybe that's something cool that we could play with, though. But in the meantime, if this ever happens to you, everyone, don't worry. A great part about looping is that you can always change the length of your loop. So let's say I looped that and I liked that, but I wanted to keep that, but at the same time make it shorter. I can change the length of the loop. And I'm just doing that by clicking on the top right side, the top right corner, and dragging that a little bit in. So now, if I played back all of these sounds, we got this. So that's something that's pretty neat. Now, what if I want to make this, a bigger looping section? What I can do is duplicate the track and delete this clip over here, but I'll do a little bit of remapping. So I'm going to map this, now this fourth one over here. And this is a way I can stack different kinds of layers. So this is really the vocal looping kinds of things. Ooh, whoops. No, I do not want to do that. I want to map this instead. Great. So let's layer on some vocals. Ooh. And let's make sure that it maybe harmonizes with this first one. Cool. So I know what I'm going to record. Let's start recording it. Turning on my monitoring again. Yeah. So all of these are still playing. They're still going on in the background. I haven't stopped transport, but they're all kind of just looping on their own. Yeah. And that's kind of like the basics of looping. Like I like thinking about them, yes, as separate entities, the MIDI looping and the vocal looping, just because they're a little bit different. And that's why maybe for the remaining time that I have, I'll introduce to you a way that I like setting up vocal looping, which is maybe a little bit more on the advanced side. And no problem, MK Got Beats. Happy to share more info. And thank you for the subscription. And also everyone else, if you haven't subscribed to us yet, please make sure you do so that you can be updated and notified whenever we go live. So let's say I've got all of these sounds. I'm pretty happy with where these are, but I want to add on some more vocal layers. I'm going to show you a technique that I like using a lot of whenever I'm layering on different kinds of vocals. And to do this, I'm going to start off from scratch. So I'm going to also click on all of these tracks and make them a little bit smaller too. So they're a little bit on the thinner side, but we can still see what's happening with them. I'm going to create a new audio track off the bat. And this one's going to be completely new. Let's also recolor this. So I'll color this one blue instead. It's going to be our second layer of vocal loops. So I'm going to call this Vox Loop. And I want to make sure of a couple of things in this case for this one. So this is a special routing technique that I use a lot of, especially if I'm ever directly monitoring my voice. So this is the setup that I use for dolltr more often than not, rather than the setup that you saw me do just now. What I do with vocal loops instead, whenever I'm recording as part of my live setups, is that instead of taking audio from an external source, for example, the other mic, the mic that I have right now. I was going to say something else. The mic that I have, this external source, or it could be any other kind of microphone that I have. Instead of taking audio directly from that, what I opt to do is take audio from some kind of vocal input directly. So this means that instead of doing audio from external in, I can click on this drop-down menu and say audio from K-Mix or mic, and I can say post FX. This means that any audio that's going to come in is going to come in after it's been processed through these effects. So you can ignore solo safe for now. That's something just for me to make me hear myself with you as well. But I've got some EQ and compression on my monitoring vocal come in. This narrating vocal that you hear, it's got EQ and compression on it. This means that my vocal loop, when I record it in here, the EQ and the compression is going to be baked into that. This is useful because then I don't need to have instances of an EQ and compression on every single track. I can print out that vocal with the effects baked onto it. So I wouldn't have to, put 3 separate effects on this track, for example, over here. I wouldn't also have to put 3 other effects on this track over here. Because if you think about it, let's say I had 20 vocal loops, and I've done shows like that before, not just for me, but also for other artists that I've designed shows for. They sometimes have 20 vocal loops going. And it's like, how do you manage that with CPU? By doing this, you can manage the effects and you can print those, especially if they are going to be on multiple instances of the same track. And in this case, I'm just going to set this up in advance and then we'll do some widespread vocal looping. So let's do Vox Loop 1. I'm going to duplicate this track and we'll do Vox Loop 2. We'll do Vox Loop 3 also and Vox Loop 4. And I'm not sure if it's interesting. I've pronounced these both as Vox and Vox in my life. So it's pick one or the other, I guess. But let's do some advanced MIDI mapping. Or not advanced MIDI mapping, but setting up MIDI maps in advance. So what I've done is I've put my MIDI keyboard, my MPK Mini, into its second bank mode, because if you remember, we used all of the 8 pads first for something else. So what I'm going to do now is set these up so that they're functioning a little bit differently. They're sending out different MIDI messages by putting them into a different bank of MIDI messaging notes. And now I can map them again. So same thing. We're just going to map the first clip slot of each of these tracks as a record function, and then we're gonna map the stop clip buttons on the end of each track also. So here we go. MIDI map. This is gonna be 1. Great. This one's gonna be 2. Here's 3, and here's 4. And then the stop buttons now. Cool. Cool. And for this purpose, what I'll also do is instead of just using reverbs or any kinds of other devices that affect time and space directly on the tracks. For example, in this case, I put reverb directly on this track as an insert. Instead, what I'm going to do is use the sends and returns in live. So by default, any any kind of live set that you open up, if it's a default live set, will pop up with 2 return tracks. And those are the ones that you can see over here on the right. You've got reverb and you've got delay. So reverb and delay are I would say two of the more common kinds of effects that you have. And they tend to sound pretty good on a lot of instruments that are a bit more harmonic or melodic. In this case, for example, if I wanted to send my voice to a reverb, I could do that. So now you'll hear this more reverberated. I could also send it to a delay from the sends over here. But I'm going to do it for the vocal loops. I'm going to send these vocal loops to the reverb. So this way, when I record all of these effects, yes, they will be printed with the EQ and the compression, but through the sends and returns, they're going to have delays and reverbs that I can then control even after I've recorded something. So it's a little bit of deciding what you want to make a send as and what you want to set as like a return or an insert. So sends and returns versus inserts. So I'm going to put a little bit of delay on this too. And let's see what we can get going now. Maybe let's even try if we can do it without like the click. So here we go. Let's also make these louder. And let's think of some like other stuff to loop. Cool. I got some stuff. Here we go. Oh, whoops. I accidentally pressed the wrong thing. That's alright. Happens. Let's keep this going. Second loop, here we go. Second loop. Third loop. Maybe first loop, let's double the first loop. Cool. So just grabbing all of those and not stopping transport, but keeping them going. So that's a little bit of the live looping process. I think the moment you understand the concept of what it means to press record in a clip slot and layer something on with it, it becomes a lot easier to understand the principles behind live looping and just the way looping works in general. Not even live, but just the way that you're able to trigger clips. And now if I wanted to, I could even form a little bit of an arrangement with this too. So I'm going to also increase some of the effects on these and manage these also. Maybe for the vocals, for the original vocals, we'll have some more reverb on them too. Great. So now let's bring these up and let's do a little bit of a mini performance. Cool. Let's stop all of these clips first and let's do it. Here we go. and then we get our weird little pitch bendy sort of thing at the end. But yeah, that's kind of how you start off doing it, and it's really just understanding the placement of things, the placement of time in live, and I think that's really what makes live so special and why I like it so much compared to other DAWs. Not that I don't like them too. I mean, if you've watched our other streams, you'll know that I love Logic too, and I love Bitwig too, and I'm certified in all of them. So it's kind of like I have these like it's a bit like picking your favorite child. So I feel very strangely about it, but maybe if I had to pick, then live would be like the best behaved of my favorite children. So it's like don't tell my kids that. But yeah, so that's a little bit of what it means, I think, to start doing live looping and to be able to manage all of these loops on the fly and also manage how they are in terms of their audio routing. I think if anything, maybe I hope that you take away the last part that I mentioned about the audio routing specifically for vocal loops and for loops where you might have many instances of the same thing being looped on top of each other. Why not just take the output of the audio from another track and record that instead? And that way you can print that kind of audio and you don't have to have the same types of devices on each of the tracks. So now instead of, having, let's see, we have 2 over here. So 2 times 4, that would be 8 of these. We have none of them on any of the tracks, but we still get that audio that's been EQ'd and that's been compressed and that's then been recorded. Of course, then you can't go ahead and undo any of these things once they've been printed in and recorded in. But that's really a decision that I think you have to make as an artist and as a practitioner. And I feel like the more you perform and the more you start doing it, the more you'll get used to the workflow. Like at first, I was also really kind of confused about what would be the best way to go about doing it. But this is something that I've figured out after like years of doing this and really just time and time again of working at it and just referencing maybe something that someone in a previous stream asked me before. They were kind of asking me like, how long did it take for you to understand really all of these things? I don't necessarily think of things in terms of time, but I think about it in repetitions. So at this stage, I've probably done like, to be frank, hundreds of live performances, and I've made thousands of mistakes. Like if I could make like hundreds of mistakes per performance, which I sometimes do, and it's take it in my stride. But yeah, it's just that number of repetitions. I think at this point, maybe I'm closer and closer to my 1,000 times of doing something. But it's always also, and I should mention also that it's done with a lot of joy. I think it's only something that I could do 1,000 times and 1,000 times even more and 10,000s of times more because I love it and I love doing a lot of live performance things and I love figuring out solutions and also teaching people how to fish instead of getting a fish and giving it to you. So I hope that it's kind of been helpful with all of this. And thank you so much. Yeah, Scott, you are most welcome. Live Society, yes, totally. It is a lot faster, at least for me personally, and also because I should mention as well that oftentimes for all of these things, I have templates for them set up. So I'll keep all of these things and I have like, templates for myself. Luis definitely left out the best behaved comment. Yeah, totally. No problem. We're happy to have you. And again, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning into 343 TV. It means a lot to us that we have your continued support. We might have a couple of other streams coming in this month, and then we may see how things go. But as always, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate all of you tuning in. If you have any last questions, because we do have a couple more minutes, feel free to let us know if you do. You can type them into the chat or any thoughts and questions in general or comments as well. Those are also fine. Just going to make sure that I am seeing everything over here because I can see most of the chat most of the time. I just need to I have 10 devices at this point. And I was joking with the other 343 people about it, but I feel as if, yes, we might have gotten better at online teaching, but we've all also kind of upped our streaming game. So maybe we're 343 Stream Team instead of the 343 Dream Team. Although we are absolutely the 343 Dream Team, I think. It's wonderful working with us. But also, I also should mention, yes, if you do want to find out more about our classes, please head over to 343labs.com. I do teach a couple of the classes as well as a bunch of wonderful instructors, including 4 Ableton Certified Trainers that we have at 343 Labs, which is possibly the highest per capita in the United States. So yeah, thank you again for joining us as well. Matt, yes, so this is going to be available for replay. That said, only for a limited amount of time though, because in the near future, we are looking to have 343 TV just be like a one-off thing. So that's something to consider as well about timing. And Matt, a question. You're new to Ableton. That's great. Ableton is, so if you're new to Ableton, then maybe I'll just share with you that Ableton is the company and Live is the software. If I make a shirt like that, let me know if you want to get one. If anyone's in the chat, I'm gonna maybe like make a shirt that does that as well. So I'll answer a couple more questions. Bucktank, some templates are a quick video for that. I actually do have a couple of templates. So if you head over to my presentation from the Ableton user group a couple of months ago, there's a presentation I've done about live looping. You can also check out a tutorial that I did on a song of mine called Skylark, which is also on the 343 Labs channel. So if you look for dolltr Skylark, you'll probably be able to find that. And I do a breakdown of my live looping template. Scott Vincent, how do you mute the metronome for others than yourself? So as I mentioned, I'm not muting the metronome. I'm having it unmuted, but I'm having it play back in my headphones. So that's a little bit of audio routing for live performance. And that could be another topic as well. Matt. Yeah, cool. I'm glad that you want to get one. Yay. So yes, there will totally be more things on live. I host the Monday show every Monday called Tips and Tricks, and I do tips and tricks related to live. I know it's a bit of a generic name, but my show is specifically related to things having to do with live. And yeah. So Louise, do you have a default template, or do you find it easier to start from blank? That's a great question. I do both, actually. So sometimes if I have an idea that's in my head and I know that I know the exact steps to like quickly bang out all of these ideas and make them very structured, then I hit to one of my templates. But if I'm just having a little bit of a fun time exploring and getting to know different ideas or messing around on Push a little bit, I don't start from a template. So I guess it's always use case. If I'm doing one of my daily streaming exercises, because I do stream every day. So for me personally, it's like if I'm doing that kind of regular exercise, I just go ahead and start from blank. But if I'm doing a song that I've maybe thought of and I'm waking up in the morning and it's this idea that I need to get out before I forget, then I head over to one of my templates. So I hope that answers the question. Thank you so much, Aren, for your final questions. I do know that we are closing in on time, but it has been wonderful sharing with you once again. Thank you. My name's dolltr. I also go by Claire when I teach at 343 Labs, and I will see all of you again next Monday. So have a great week, everyone. See you soon.
Forsaken in fraction, blood through my veins, runs deep in reaction. Inside this fire blazes through the pouring rain. Ignite this time, burning skies won't be in vain. From the ash my heart will rise, from the truth my soul can hide, soul can hide. It lives in my chemistry. You ain't got a hold on me. life's ahead of me. I stay too long just to melt into a silent wave. Don't forget me when I'm gone. Oh, well, it lives in our chemistry. You ain't got a hold on me. It lives in our chemistry. Oh, it lives in our chemistry. We ain't gonna let this be. It lives in our chemistry. It lives in our chemistry. Oh, well, it lives in our chemistry. Oh, well, it lives in our chemistry.